responsible for an innovation program that funds innovative startups and organizations from around the world that have meaningful solutions to solve our greatest challenges on Earth and in the oceans. We're a very proud founder of my colleague here, Julika, on the left. So before we get into the panel and the questions and our panelists themselves, I'd love if you guys could spare us a moment so that we can watch a quick video to put us in the right state of mind. Thank you.
When you're starting to think about whales, you're thinking about being at the coast. And the reality is you could be anywhere on this planet, in the middle of a continent, and whales in the ocean are still playing a role. What we're beginning to understand is the role of these different creatures in the ocean and the critical role that really these allies of ours have been. In all the years we've been hunting them, we've been catching them in nets, and yet they have still been working for us and working for the rest of the planet. We lost about 80% of all the biomass of whales in the last century. We need to get them back. We need to see recovery, and healthy whales are going to mean a healthy ocean, and a healthy ocean means that we stand a chance in terms of the whole climate crisis moving forward. To understand where whales and dolphins are in the ocean, we've been having to do quite long projects. We're having to be out on boats, we're having to use aircraft. Teams are actually in the field, away from base, and it's only after quite a long period that we can actually collate the data and start to understand what's going on. The difference is, using space technology, we can start to look at historical data and current data, and we can do that from our desktops.
The 30 by 30 target means that we would like to protect 30% of our environment by 2030. But this also means that we have to do a lot of research, because currently more than 80% of the ocean is unexplored and unobserved. With space technology, we can go into vast areas and capture these vast areas almost instantaneously.
Essentially, what SPACEWHALE do is they have built this machine learning and AI algorithm that they overlay onto the satellite data, process that to identify where in the pictures there are whales, and from there start to actually understand the distribution and abundance of these marine mammals within a specific area of the ocean.
In the past, it's been ignorance that's been killing whales and dolphins. We just didn't know what was happening, and we didn't understand. Space technology is the key to opening up and then innovating. And that's what comes from this kind of collaboration. You start to think of new ways to use the data.
We understand that companies are looking to innovate and use new technologies, such as space tech. And what we are doing to help companies bridge that gap and adopt space tech is to build an ecosystem of organizations that we are collaborating with actively.
It's Deloitte's role to be a connector in the ecosystem, to bring the best-in-class technology to organisations who are going to benefit from it. When we talk about space tech, it's still an emerging area, and a lot of organisations aren't really grasping the potential it could unlock for them.
We can go into remote areas where nobody has ever conducted research before. So currently we're doing a proof of concept. We are showing that we can create important marine mammal area based on SPACEWHALE data. Then afterwards we can give the data into the right hands. But this is really just a proof of concept.
If we can scale this up to the levels that we require, we'll be able to start mapping huge sections of the ocean. But the data we get will also mean that we can react quicker. We can know where whales and dolphins are, we can see what the threats are, we can marry that with illegal fishing data, say, and we can start to advise how regulatory authorities can react to those situations. All of these things which in the past we would have to be in the field doing, we're actually doing from our laptops. We're sat at our desks and we're able to leverage all of this expertise, all of this data, and actually get the information to the right people in expeditious time compared to what we used to do.
So space technology is already in our day-to-day lives, whether we notice it or not, and that is where the market will be going. So companies will use satellite data to drive insights.
If you are looking at how to innovate, how to be sustainable, either in your supply chain or within your business, we will guarantee that satellite data can play a role in helping to solve those challenges.
In the beginning, we wouldn't really have even contemplating using space technology. It just seemed so far away from our day-to-day lives. But really, Deloitte are an amazing catalyst. They can identify partners, they can bring people together in an environment where actually you can start to spark off each other and ideas start to flow. And I think that's really at the root of this amazing company, which really adds value to what we're trying to do in terms of conservation.
Wonderful. Well, though none of us here work for Deloitte, I think we appreciate, this moment. I think what was very, very interesting about this video as setting the scene and the context is the relationship between technology and its advances and how it's used for a meaningful purpose, something that allows us to go into areas that we couldn't go before. Ignorance is no longer, an excuse. And the extent that it can actually accelerate change in how we see, understand, and protect marine life, in particular whales, which is a key part of our conversation today. So with that as our kind of opening statements for today, I'd love to introduce you to our panelists. I'm going to begin all the way to the left with Dr. Heidi Pearson, is a professor of marine biology at the University of Alaska Southeast. Her research focuses on the behavior, ecology, and conservation of marine mammals with specific expertise in humpback whales, small dolphins, and sea otters. Thank you for coming here on the panel today. To her right, we have our colleague Ed, who was born an islander and spent perhaps most of time as a child in the sea than on land. He's devoted his life to conservation, both on land and on more recently returning to his watery roots at the Whale and Dolphin Conservation, WDC, where he's head of the intergovernmental engagement and coordinates the work of the organization across multiple species, biodiversity, and climate fora. Thank you very much, Ed, for being here. And last but not least, all the way here close to me at my left, we have Julika Voss, who graduated with a master's degree in marine environmental sciences, from the University of Oldenburg in Germany. Her research focuses in marine mammal ecology, and she has gained practical experience in Azores, Iceland, and Italy. She's a research consultant at BioConsult, also in Germany, focusing on the monitoring impact of noise from offshore wind farms on harbor porpoises using passive acoustic monitoring and a bunch of other stuff that somebody like me doesn't understand. But I'm sure we will learn together in this panel. Thank you all for being here today. And we've had lots of conversations before in preparation for this session. And what amazed me the most is the understanding that we are learning about whales and their movements so that we can better understand the health of our marine ecosystem and of our oceans. And the more we can pay attention to this particular species, the more we're able to define and understand what goes on in multiple areas in the entire ecosystem. So I'd love to start with you, Dr. Heidi. If you can give us a little bit more of the work that you do and help us understand more how we, as we focus on this particular species with the whales, what more can we learn? What else we need to learn? And eventually we're going to get to the technology question of like, how's technology going to get us to learn that?
Thanks for the question. And I'm based in Juneau, Alaska, a long ways from here. And one of my primary study species is the humpback whale. And humpback whales are an amazing species for many reasons, but they are a really great umbrella species to study if we're thinking about marine conservation. They're very large, they live a long time, they migrate across vast expanses of water. So the whales I study in Juneau spend their summers up there feeding, and then they go down to Hawaii. Some of them go to Mexico to breed in the winter. So they are crossing boundaries, they are going on the high seas, and so if we can understand the need to protect them, we're protecting vast expanses of ocean, which includes all the other species that the whales share their ecosystem with. Everything from phytoplankton, krill, fish, on up to other species. And I would also say can help us to save ourselves as well by allowing whales to thrive and create these healthy ecosystems.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi. Ed, how about you? Help us understand the role that WDC plays in trying to materialize what Dr. Heidi is saying.
Yeah, so WDC as an organization, WDC stands for Whale and Dolphin Conservation. I like to say that we are, I don't know if anyone is here from the UK, but we are the bronze seal of nature conservation charities. That means we do exactly what it says on the tin, whale and dolphin conservation. So we've been going for over 30 years now, quite a bit more than 30 years, maybe 34 now. Came about after the moratorium on commercial whaling, which is when the intentional killing of whales for commercial purposes was banned during the end of the 1980s. But there was a real need for an organization that was looking into all of the other range of threats to whales and dolphins across the ocean, from overfishing to marine pollution, plastic pollution. We also work on the issue of captivity, as there's no way that you can reasonably provide for the needs of whales and dolphins in a captive setting. So our tagline is a world where every whale and dolphin is safe and free. And so there's lots of things that we work on and lots of different ways that we can help achieve that. And I could sit here for probably the whole session and tell you all about that. But so we work through lots of different fora, campaigning, policy change, working with governments, working with grassroots organizations, working with scientists and researchers to really develop a holistic situation where we are getting towards that world where every whale and dolphin is safe and free.
Wonderful. And you, Julika, if you just give us a little bit more on the bringing in the hard piece, right? The technology side of things. How are you looking up to the sky and looking back down to help fit the mission of both of these folks on your left side?
I would like to go one step back, because actually we all rely on our oceans. So every second breath we take comes from the ocean. And the ocean has absorbed more than 90% of heat excess caused by human activity, and it regulates our temperature. So this is why Heidi, for example, is able to live in Alaska. Otherwise, the poles would be incredibly cold. So only with our oceans we are able to live where we live, and only with our oceans we have the temperature we currently have. Otherwise, it would have been way hotter already. However, on the other side, we still have basically no idea of our oceans. So more than 80% of our ocean is unexplored. And actually, I mean, we can go everywhere by boat, but it's gonna take decades, and we do not have this time anymore. And still, we need to just fill the knowledge gaps we currently have. And this is why we are using space technology to actually fill the knowledge gaps and, unlock the secrets of our oceans. And then we use whales, because when we know there are a lot of whales, we probably also know that there will be a lot of food, so a lot of fish and a lot of other species. So these are probably areas where you have a high biodiversity. So then these areas are important to designate as marine protected areas. So then we can give back the data to them.
Yeah. And I think on your last part there, so the designated conservation areas, which said that right now is only 8%. Right, and the target is to go 30% by 2030, right? In that journey, one of the things that I really enjoyed in our conversation was understanding, well, what's impeding that from happening, right? And one of the topics we spoke about was, well, the ocean is a pretty busy place. I think, Ed, you talk a little bit about there's ocean liners moving back and forth. There's fishermen that hopefully are doing the right thing, sometimes not doing the right thing. There's plastic pollution, right? There's stuff that's in the way for us to be able to get there. So I'm wondering, Ed, if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more, right, on what are these challenges? Like when we think about 30% in 2030, 2030 is 7 years from now. What's your optimistic level?
Yeah, you're right. We haven't got long. But I was in Montreal this time last year, and we have the Global Biodiversity Framework now, which was a real seminal achievement for the world's biodiversity. But, we're here in Dubai to talk about climate, and these things are inextricably linked, and we won't achieve what we need to achieve on biodiversity if we don't achieve it for climate, and vice versa. But the Global Biodiversity Framework laid out this gauntlet that the world's countries agreed to, that we need to protect and restore 30% of land and marine ecosystems by 2030. As Julika said, that we're about 8%, and a lot of those areas, we call them paper parks because they've been designated, but they don't have actual protections, and actually a lot of negative industries and interactions are still happening in those areas. Around the UK, for example, we have marine protected areas that you're still allowed to go industrial trawl fishing in, which is the most destructive fishing industry around. If that happened on land, there would be outcry just by taking these, in an analogous way, it would be like clear felling rainforest, but it's hidden in the ocean. And when we're thinking about marine mammals, traditionally marine protected areas are in one place, and we go, okay, there's a coral reef there or a mangrove, that's really important, let's look after that. But marine mammals are highly mobile and migratory species. Some species travel 15,000 kilometers a year on their annual migration. So if you're going to properly protect a species, and you have to protect them throughout their range. So especially those migratory species, they feed in colder polar waters, and then they migrate to warmer, temperate and tropical waters to have their young. And so just protecting them where they're feeding is not good enough. You have to protect them where they're breeding, where they're raising their young, and that migratory corridor in between. And those migratory corridors are offshore, out there in the ocean, and so having this kind of data where we can really understand it better, where we've not been able to look before, is incredibly important to help us inform those conservation management decisions in the ocean.
And staying with that, so that means that we are, if we gather the right information or the right evidence to say that there is a path that needs protection, what happens after? How does it work to get a particular area to be designated as a conservation for marine?
Well, we could have a whole session on that if you wanted to, because we have these international agreements, and that's what we have to do. But then it comes down to individual countries to be able to implement that within their own waters. All countries really only have jurisdiction out to 200-mile limit of their borders, but beyond that, it's always been a bit of sort of pirate territory. But we do now have a High Seas Treaty, which has been agreed, which is also known as biodiversity beyond the borders of national jurisdiction, but that's not in force yet, and there's a race to ratification now, where countries are saying that they will bring this legislation into their national legislation, so it allows us to start actually designating marine protected areas in the high seas, which we've not really been able to do before. There is some, but we'll get to a point where actually we can do that. With the issue of marine mammals, we have a task force and a project through IUCN, which is called Important Marine Mammal Areas. So we've been bringing together scientists from regions from all around the world and really looking into the data and the understanding, going back decades, whatever data there is, and then thinking about what are the important life stage areas and migratory patterns in those particular areas. And we've done that for about 2/3 of the global ocean now. But this is a multi-year project. It's taken hundreds, probably thousands by the time we get to it, of scientists' time to input into it. But then we need to, importantly, do something with that data. So we've got these areas. There's a map. If you just Google important marine mammal areas, there's a fantastic online interactive map which shows you where those areas are and what species are in them. So at WDC, what we're doing now is working through these big conventions. High Seas Treaty will be one of them, but there's the EBSA process through CBD, which is ecologically significant areas. I can't remember the exact thing, but it's finding these mechanisms where we can use that data and then push it through to designate areas.
Wonderful. Well, I want to take one step back and to Dr. Heidi, and then help us understand. So you got to teach her satellites what to look for, right? There's a particular thing, the particular behaviors about the whales or the animals that we're focusing on that can help us generate the data, right? The evidence that this particular area is of importance. Can you share a little bit more on how your research helps guide the development of technology or to push the technology in the right direction?
Sure, that's a really important question. And ultimately, we need to have everything that we see from space or from what we call these remote sensing techniques. We need to have it grounded in actual empirical data that we see with our eyes. And so I'll go back to the long-term study that I have going on in Juneau with humpback whales. And over the course of the summer, which is broadly May through late September, I'm on the water every week doing photo ID surveys. And so I have my study site, every humpback whale that I see. I also look at killer whales, all smaller cetaceans as well. But we stop and we take photographs of them. And for humpback whales, we photograph their tail or their fluke, because each of their flukes has a distinctive pigmentation pattern, like a human thumbprint. And then over time, we can recognize those individuals. And so we're getting to know individuals and their distinct movement patterns, their social patterns, their feeding behaviors. And so with Eulica, I would be more than happy, actually, to share my long-term sighting data with you around Southeast Alaska and then see if we find any of those whales in space, like one of our most well-known whales. She's a female named Flame. She's an amazing animal. She's had 4 calves in a row, which is a near record. Like 4 years in a row, she's had a calf. And I would love to say, Eulica, we saw Flame on this day at this spot. Did you see her from space? I mean, that would be amazing. And then, you know, that's a very localized level. But then we could broaden out to look at these migratory corridors and see, you know, are there places and times where whales are aggregating? And those we would indicate as very special areas that we probably need to look at protecting. So I think the opportunities for collaboration with this technology are pretty endless between field biologists and then the technology aspect.
So let's move over to you, Julika. Let's talk about the technology aspect. I mean, satellites are out there, right? I'm assuming you didn't buy them, right? They belong to somebody, and you're just trying to get that data. Can you speak a little bit about how does it work, right, for BioConsult? How does it work to engage with the folks that own the satellites, right? And how do you get the data? And then the AI component, how do you teach the technology, right, to understand whether it's her whale, right, that's in particular?
Yeah, so as already said, we do not have own satellites, unfortunately. So what we do is that we work together with huge satellite providers like Maxar, Airbus, Planet, all of these. And I guess you all know their satellite image, because if you have a look into the newspaper, it's usually all of them. So what we do is that we say, okay, we would like to have a satellite image in that particular time frame from this study area. And then they do some snapshots for us, just like having a look. And then actually what we usually do is that we have a look into the satellite image saying like, okay, there have been clouds the entire day, we're not going to buy that satellite image. Or we have a look and say, well, it's a perfect satellite image, now we're going to buy that one. And what we then do is, because we have huge study areas, it's like 4,000 square kilometers. And I guess most of you, it's just like a crazy number, so it's like 600,000 soccer pitches. It's about the size of Dubai, actually. So if you imagine now, and then you have a whale of a body length of, let's say, 30 meters, searching for this manually, it's gonna take you just like hours, months. So this is why we say, okay, we need AI to actually detect the objects. And then what we afterwards do is that we do a manual review. So everything which was detected by our algorithm is then verified by us to have a look which species it is. Is it actually a whale, or did the algorithm confuse it with a wave, for example? And what we also noticed is that this is a really good approach. So actually there has been a study, for example, where we said, okay, we are going to use AI, and then afterwards our manual review, and then we teamed up with really experienced people, and they actually only did the manual review. And what we observed is that we nearly found twice as many whales, because they had a look on, let's say, 700 water images, and then there was one water image where there was a tiny whale, so they just missed it. On the other hand, there was also a citizen science project, because, and at least I can only speak for myself, but I love whales. And I guess most of you also love whales. And then also taking into account the space component, it's really exciting. So everybody was so excited about that project. So everybody saw a whale in a wave. So actually they had 10 times more whales than there have been actually. So we also noticed this is not going to work. So this is why we always say we have to use AI for actually detecting the objects, but then also we need the manual review from trained people who know how a whale looks from space.
So in that part, is it a citizen engagement? So these are folks that you train to say, as you've with your eyes spot, then you can counter with what AI is saying.
Yes.
Like a validation process.
Actually, we have a team, and this is already working on this since more than 10 years now. And it's about 30 people, and they really know how it looks like. Because for an algorithm, for example, coming back to your humpback whales, they have really long flippers. And if you imagine a humpback whale from above, now it's like this shape and then the flippers. But if you have a paddle boat from above, it has a similar shape. So for the algorithm, it's difficult to say, like, is it a paddle boat from above or is it a humpback whale from above? On the other hand, if you have humpback whales, and I guess you know this, they are so playful. They love playing. So they love raising just like a flipper on the water surface. And always the AI needs to say, well, it's still a whale. And this is why you really need trained people who also know the kind of species. Is it a species which loves playing like humpback whales, or is it a species like blue whales who are usually just like calm on the water surface and not playing? So, and this is really difficult to train an AI using this kind of character a species it has. So you need always human beings who have been in the field, who know like what kind of character the species has.
So I think the part that I want to discuss now and to help us have as much of a complete conversation as possible is to understand where does money come in, right? I'm a money guy. I like to talk about money. So your technology is not free. You got to buy those pictures, right? And the work that you do in organizing everybody, I think the word ecosystem there is something that I want you to be able to also help us understand who are the folks that are in the room, who are the folks that are generally interested in this space, and your research, Dr. Heidi. You know, how do we get the continuation of that work to be continuing to evolve with time, so that we are always learning more and potentially educating more technology. So I want to see if you guys can share a little bit more, right, of how does something like this gets financed. I don't know how you.
Okay, shall I start? Yeah, sure. So when we actually started, it was co-financed by the European Space Agency. Now we got a grant by you, we got a grant by Deloitte, but really for scaling this up, for us, it's sometimes giving us hope, and on the same time it's frustrating because everything is in place. The algorithm is in place, the satellites are up in the air, but really what is hindering us is the price of satellite imagery. For example, if we would now say, Ed already talked about important marine mammal areas in the Indian Ocean, for example. If we would say we are going to scale this, all important marine mammal areas in the Indian Ocean, it's about $30 million. And nearly all of this money would go to satellite providers. So this is why we need philanthropic organizations, for example, to come in, or better access to these data, because the data is available. We just need to get it. And I also think that every decision we do must rely on data.
$30 million to widen only that particular area? How much is it going to cost to get, to widen to 30% of the world's oceans?
A bit more.
That's a chunk of change.
Yeah.
Oh my. Ed, anything you'd like to contribute on the money part?
Well, yeah, I think we all know that we need more data. And the way that satellite companies are set up at the moment are for predominantly business purposes. In fact, military purposes a lot of the time. That's what a lot of this very high resolution satellite data is used for tracking human movements and things like this. But these satellites are up there, like Ulrika says, they're flying over the ocean all the time. They can capture the imagery. And so it's a bit of a mind shift in perhaps their perception of their business model, and they don't need to sell it to us. All we want to do is do something good, and we can do really good stuff if we just have access to that data. But we also have some really big sponsors and stuff up on the screen here. If anybody would like to work with us to put a satellite in space that was just purely for monitoring nature, that would be revolutionary, not just for us, but for all nature conservation organizations. It's just that access to data, because we've had issues with this project where we were trying to send a satellite to a particular spot, but then somebody else who's got more money and more influence can just take that satellite away and send it to another part of the planet on the same day, and we don't have access to that data. So it's just about opening up those opportunities, because if we don't develop these mechanisms to monitor biodiversity data, we're not going to win. So give it to us for free, please. Somebody help us out.
And so, okay, got it. Give it to you for free. I think that I like that element, and I do like the call to action on delivering a satellite that's dedicated for the purposes of marine and conservation on our lands as well. I think that's something that should be, we need to write this down and figure out how that's possible. But on our conversations, we also spoke about, well, how, as you generate data is usually something important to somebody, all right? So we spoke about, for example, vessels and collisions, and how having, for fishermen and for, the ocean liners moving back and forth, how that particular piece of information might be valuable and potentially commercially, valuable to them. So is there a future or a scenario where the data that's generated for the right purpose, but could also be used for private sector or folks that are moving around, that are also utilizing the ocean in a way that it helps sponsor this research that we're doing here?
Well, I can take a crack at that question, and I think that's a really important idea of linking what we're doing scientifically with maybe a business or a more practical application. And I think with whales, knowing where they are, again, these hot spots and hot moments in space and time, could help vessels to know to avoid those areas. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think anyone wants to hit a whale. It's an awful thing for many reasons. And in some countries, including the US, if you hit a whale and there's enough evidence to find who did it, there can be a pretty severe fine under federal law. But of course, whales are often on the high seas where there is not that regulation. But I think that, and talking with people that operate vessels and fishermen, again, no one wants to harm a whale. And so I think if they would understand, if you could ideally have the whole ocean mapped with SPACEWHALE, and we can identify these hot spots and hot moments, and then send that out to ships. We have AIS technology. We have all this technology already to communicate with ships and between ships. Let them know where these animals are. Maybe it's just a little detour they have to take. And so that's one idea that comes to mind. Just the more we know, the more power we have for conservation.
Wonderful. Anyone wants to have another crack at trying to figure out how do we find usable data out of the data that you're already generating to help us find folks that would be, I guess, trying to see how we can bring all the folks into this conversation, right? The sponsors that you have, how do we get more different eyeballs paying attention to this? Does that make sense? I'm not trying to be pushy on this, but I'm trying to get a sense of how do we get more folks who aren't aware.
And there is a lot more understanding now and visibility of impacts on climate and impacts on nature from businesses. And there are frameworks coming through now. We've had TCFD for a while, and now there's TNFD, which is looking at the impact of businesses on nature, and they have to be able to disclose that now. What are those impacts on nature? And I think that can be a powerful motivator, because it gives companies a competitive edge, because everybody knows that we need to reduce our impacts on nature. It's evident in policy forums that that's what we have to do, and now there is mechanisms for businesses that have to report on that. And so this data can inform those processes, and if a company is able to measurably change their practices so they're having less impact, it can give them a competitive advantage and then pull everybody in the right direction. So they might not have a an intrinsic love for whales like we'll do up here, but if it can improve their business returns and give them a competitive edge, then they'll be able to say to their shipping providers, we really need you to be taking a different route. And that can just be a small number of miles sometimes and only a few extra hours of shipping, but it can make a massive difference to whales and marine ecosystems. So it's about making it relevant. And coming back to your statements earlier, it does come down to the money a lot of the time. So you have to make it relevant to the money.
Yeah, and that's I think what we're trying to figure out here is what kind of the money. And I don't want this to be a question all about money, but I think there's the folks that tend to fund these spaces tend to be the same folks, right? The philanthropists, the NGOs, or some of the donor countries spend time, some of their funds here. But it's also trying to unlock the other trillions of dollars that are running around in organizations that don't tend to pay attention to this space. And I think what we want to try and see how much of the technology is of an interest, right? So even if they're not a big fan of the whales, they might be a big fan of tech. And I think that's potentially a way in, which brings me to you, Julika. At BioConsult, how do you guys see the growth of this organization, right? And the growth of technology, and who are the people that you are thinking about talking to grow this space?
Yeah, so I mean, we already said like every decision we make relies on data. And for example, there was a use case in Sri Lanka where they actually didn't know that it's a really important area for blue whales, our largest animal on Earth. So when having these data, they said, okay, we're going to reroute our shipping lane because we do not want to harm these animals. So there is a kind of will to actually do this. And I mean, we are not creating marine protected areas just out of fun. It's really important for fighting against climate change. So this is why we actually said we would love to designate 30%, and this was already agreed. So we really need to implement this now, and therefore also there needs to be money from the governments, for example, because the consequences of climate change are way higher than actually monitoring now. And we cannot manage something where we do not have data. So we need to measure everything before managing these areas.
Absolutely. You can't manage what you can't see, right?
Yeah.
I would just add on that, we know that nature is providing incredibly important roles, so we should have a precautionary approach to managing nature and whales. We shouldn't wait for all of the data. We know that they are providing ecosystem services in a range of different ways, but of course, the specifics of specifically where to protect in space and time, we do need data for that, but we can still reduce our impact in the ocean in a multitude of different ways, and we can do that now.
Yeah. Well, I'm cognizant of time, and before we have a kind of our final discussions over here, I'd love to see if anybody from the audience has a question or a comment or would like to contribute to the conservation here today. Can we borrow, a mic over here? We have two questions. Thank you.
Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Yeah, Liz Ming, I'm from Singapore. I'm also doing AI machine learning area. Actually, it's exciting. I saw you doing some AI modeling on the whales. I have never seen whales in my life yet. So actually, I want to ask you in the AI modeling compared to whales, because now the deep learning, everything, the CNN network is very strong and very mature in all the image processing. So in your case, actually, what kind of the feature considered as a whale, right? So what's different with other image modeling you are doing? What's the feature is quite, I know you mentioned about some flappers, right? It's quite big, and the size super. Maybe the water should be quite cold. Something is the feature inside. So I just want to get some feeling from you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is a really good question, because actually And I guess, you know, you have never seen a satellite image in the newspaper just out of water. So this is why you have to imagine there was no archival imagery when we started. There was no satellite imagery from water, because why to do actually a satellite snapshot from water if nobody's going to buy it anyway? So when we started, and Bioconsult, yeah, we do SPACEWHALE, but we also do other services. So we are also in the plane having a look on marine mammals. And then we use this footage and downsample this to the resolution of satellite imagery. So we used the footage from our planes and then had a look. This is how it would like when having a look from satellite. And then later on, we also, for example, use drone footage and then downsample this to the resolution of satellite imagery to really have various species, various behaviors, various places, because also water looks different in different places. And then now, of course, we also already had previous projects, so we also implemented the footage from the satellite, the whales from previous satellite projects. So we have a different training data we use, because, I mean, you can be really good in coding, but still you need really good training data. Otherwise, you can be the best one in coding, but you need the training data to be really good. And this is why we use different kinds of training data set to really have a good AI, to really make sure we are going to detect every whale.
Is that okay? Sorry, we have a question right behind him, and I think we had a question from the good-looking gentleman over there in the back. Over there, in the back, please. Uh-oh.
Thank you, Joseph. And thank you for the invitation, Heidi. I just wanted to extend, as the whales need it, we have the Tongan whales, citizens. So I'd just like to extend the work you guys are doing, to extend it to the South Pacific, to the Kingdom of Tonga. We really need that. As you know, that how important are the whales for us, for our culture and our heritage as well. So my standing up here is just a comment, an invitation. Come and swim with the whales. You can see the majestic and how insignificant of myself and everyone when they look into their eyes, and how important it is to save the whales. Mammal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this discussion. I have a question around the siloing that often happens in respect to ocean-related ecological research. You know, you oftentimes have the whale people doing whale things, and then you have the coral reef people doing coral, and then you have the seagrass people doing seagrass. But of course, all of these are intricately connected. And I'm working on a project to create a platform really to bring different of these silos together. And so I'm curious, first of all, whether you agree with what I'm saying, and second, what type of data platforms you know that would be within this, that would correspond to this, because I'm looking for them. Or any thoughts on this would be really helpful.
As you wish.
Otherwise, I can take this question as well. You're absolutely right. We need collaboration, otherwise it's not going to work. And this is, for example, why I'm also here at COP28, because I love being in the research bubble, but really for making an impact, you also have to go into other bubbles. You have to just like meet with people from finance sector. You need to just like, this is also why we are collaborating with whale and dolphin conservation, because they have contacts to the local people, they have already contacts to the government, and it's not going to work if you're going to do it on your own. So I absolutely agree that you need collaboration. And I think we already have some collaborations which are really good, But still, we are really always searching for new collaborations, so it really might be nice to have a chat afterwards as well. We also really had some really good conversations here at the conference already, where we think it might be good to have just like conversation afterwards, because I mean, we are just like talking about designating marine protected areas the entire time, but as Ed already said, we do not want to have another paper MPA, so we really need areas which are also managed properly afterwards. And therefore, you always need to work together with the local people and the governments which are just like at this place. So, I mean, yeah, we are doing great research and getting the data, but we still always need the context to the local people.
And just to add to your point, I completely get that on siloed thinking, and we've got a stage full of whale people here, and there's a lot of other things living in the ocean. And you're right, it's absolutely connected. But using marine mammals and the way that they move around the ocean, you can actually include indirectly lots of other habitats and lots of other species. And I'm not saying that's the only way to go, of course. You have to look at it from a holistic whole systems perspective. And we absolutely do work with lots of other organizations. There's lots of ocean NGOs and academics here that are all cross-pollinating, and it's coming to spaces like this where we can really share those ideas and platforms and research initiatives to build up that big picture. But, you know, the ocean covers 71% of the planet, and it's a moving, crazy system of currents and life, and monitoring it as a whole. You know, we're a pretty clever set of monkeys now, but monitoring the whole ocean is a huge task, and we have to bring in all of those different sectors, NGOs, tech companies, researchers, to be able to, you know, I don't think we're completely there yet, but I think we're getting closer, and happy to have a chat with you afterwards about your platform.
It's wonderful. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I missed the beginning. You may have covered this, but Global Fishing Watch should do the vessel tracking, AIS and all that. You can import dynamic layers into that. So I would think, you may have already discovered, forgive me if you have, but I would think putting your system within their layers automatically puts them in line where the vessels already are, and you could have alerts and alarm systems and talk. Yeah, that's just my 2 cents. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good point. As Ulrika was saying, this technology is not fully scalable yet, and it allows a snapshot, really. So it allows us to develop population metrics and understand what Heidi said about hotspots and hot moments of where whales are, but it's not that kind of live sense at the moment. I think, you know, technology is moving at an absolutely rapid rate, and I would hope that in a couple of decades we are able to kind of get to a space where we are able to monitor the ocean in a more live way.
Even beyond live, if you could go back in time historically and look at where the hotspots are now and what vessel traffic was around that time if there was an incident. I mean, even just using their historical, because they go back years in their data of where all the vessels were. So I'm just thinking, even not just live, but...
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Oh, sir, yes. Go ahead. Sorry, we'll come to you now. We'll come to you in a bit. We'll come to you. Sorry. You guys okay?
You probably had this coming, but it's a natural concern. Let's say we're in an ideal world where AI is well advanced and machine learning, and it's super integrated into the marine conservation process. I was wondering, from your perspective as people in the marine biology field, is there a fear that this will compromise the positions of data scientists and people already working in the marine biology field, or do you think this will create more opportunities for work for them?
I think that it's only a positive thing in my view. As someone that studies marine mammals broadly, and I'm always looking for funding and I never have enough time or people on my team, I think that we need to embrace technology that is being done, because again, as we've been saying, the Earth is a blue planet, and these animals are all over the place, and to really enact change, we need to embrace technology. And the people that I work with in all sectors are we're all working for conservation and ecosystem health, and we're not, you know, like set your egos aside and let's work together and not worry about, you know, holding on to your data just for yourself. And so I've seen throughout my career that we have, I think, become more open as scientists with sharing and collaborating. And going back to your question over here, I think that teams are becoming more interdisciplinary, and some funding entities actually that I apply for in the US, they actually mandate an interdisciplinary team at times. And so I think that, to answer your question, I personally don't see any downside or fear or reservation in collaborating with folks like Ulika, because the technology is literally the wave of the future. And if we don't embrace it as marine scientists, you know, someone else will. So we might as well work with these amazing things that are already being formed.
And if I might add something, so we also, for example, tried like, okay, would ChatGPT be able to write a report for us? And actually, there have been some huge mistakes. And I think your AI will never be so good that there won't be any mistakes. So you will always need a kind of manual review. You will never be useless. So I think you will always need scientists who are actually going to prove, well, this is true what's going to be said.
Yes, sir.
So my name's Richard. I'm a recovering whaleaholic. I was a whale campaigner prior to the moratorium, which shows you how old I am. And around 2003, so I used to work for Greenpeace, and I've saved a whale and done stuff in the IWC. I actually decided we needed to look at things more holistically, and we sort of reorganized our campaigns, and I led the MPA campaign at Greenpeace from about 2003 until 2015. And one of the things, even though I left Greenpeace, you never really leave Greenpeace. So a few years ago, I ended up working with Callum Roberts from York University, as he was then, and we produced a map of what 30 by 30 might look like on the high seas. And what that involved was getting all these global data sets together, putting them in a systematic conservation planning process, using Mark-SAN, getting also sort of expert opinions to add into this. And we've you know, there's enough data out there to make an effective network of MPAs across the high seas now. And we built into it sort of a risk spreading mechanism in terms of climate change, because we don't know what climate change is going to do to whale movements, but we know some areas are very resilient. We know some areas have had lots of change. So if you incorporate 30% of those areas and you discount against fishing, we have all the knowledge to make 30 by 30 happen. And the more data we get, the better. So I've loved hearing this.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you. You guys want to take one more? We got 4 minutes to wrap up?
Sure.
Okay, so last question here, please. Thank you very much.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Really quick question. I know you guys spend a lot of time talking about data and AI. I'm sure you guys deal with so many unique, different types of data sets. But I'm curious to hear some about some of your guys' challenges. Are you guys having any difficulties working with specific data sets using AI tools in terms of how they're processing your data? And if so, like ideally, what would be a solution that works for you guys in regards to that?
Should I take this one?
I think so.
I'm sorry. So yeah, absolutely. Sometimes there are difficult areas. And I mean, like, for example, with a study now we are doing in the Indian Ocean, this is difficult because if you're in the high seas, the weather is not as good as if you are, for example, in the coast. So your waves are higher, so you have more swell. So this is why sometimes you will have more waves, and then it might be more difficult to distinguish a whale and a wave. What's really nice, next year the resolution of satellite imagery will considerably improve. So this is what's gonna give us kind of hope to actually be also able to have higher waves, for example. And then as I already said, your AI will only be as good as your training data is. So for example, if we would now say we're going to scale all over the Indian Ocean, we will have a way more training data for then feeding into our AI again to really improve our results. Still, I think it's really important that you will have different species, different locations, not only one location. So this is also what we really considered when having a look. So for example, we had a lot of drone footage from humpback whales, and in the end we said, we're not going to take more drone footage from this specific species, because otherwise it will because humpback whales have really long flippers. So the algorithm will always search for long flippers, and then if you have a blue whale with shorter flippers, it might not recognize this whale anymore. So this is why it's really important to have really different species, really different environments, and always feeding this into your AI and not just like going into one direction, because we don't want to have an algorithm which is only detecting one species.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your participation in the conversation today. We are almost out of time, if not already out of time. I would love for each of you guys to share very quickly your. We're in the last few days of COP, right? We're all about to go home. As you go home, how do you feel that this, on the progress of the past 12 days? On the conversations you've had here during COP, on the potential partnerships and engagements that that have been made possible here. How do you go home? What's your optimism level, Dr. Heidi?
I'm optimistic. I am also tired, like I'm sure everyone here is, but it was really energizing to be here with all of you and all the amazing community of people here from all different backgrounds and disciplines. I've never been to an event like this where I can talk with folks from so many different places and backgrounds. And regardless of the outcome of what comes out is at the high level today, perhaps, is my optimism is in the individual. And with humpback whales again, I study at the level of the individual. Knowing what the individual does makes a difference in nature. And the same thing with humans as well. Knowing what the individual does and believes and how they're going to behave and take ownership to do what we can to tackle the climate crisis gives me hope. And I've had amazing conversations. And so that's what I'll take away from COP.
That's wonderful. How about you, Ed?
I think we might get lots of variations of the same answer as we move along. But yeah, the same thing, we're still to find out what's happening in the negotiations. It's always a compromise when you work at this level. But I think one thing that's really I've taken away from this is we've had a lot of events as well in dolphin conservation over the course of the COP. And we've got people to just kind of do something a bit different. So we've had events where we've played people whale song and we've got them to lie down, we've taken people to the beach, we've got them to put their feet in the sea, and when they've kind of had these experiences, they've reconnected with something inherent in the sort of fibers of their being, and I think it's really important that we all do that. And it really re-energized people. We did it on the rest day, and it allowed people to come back here with sort of a renewed sense of enthusiasm because they really connected with nature again. And I think we're going to do more of that stuff, and I would encourage all of you to take more time in your everyday lives to go out into nature, whether you live near a woods or a park or even just looking at a plant on a windowsill. It's just remembering that connection and then taking that through into the rest of your lives.
So for me also the 2 weeks have been really exhausting, to be honest, but also really exciting because I met so many different people from so many different fields, and usually, for example, I'm on a conference where there are a lot of satellite providers. So I'm the only biologist in a conference full of satellite providers. Or for example, I'm in a conference where there are only people who work with whales and dolphins, which is also amazing. But still, I feel like this conference really brought together so many different people, and I had really good conversations. So what's giving me hope is that we have the solutions. We just need to use them, and we need to implement them, and we need to act and not only speak. So this is what I'm going to take home and trying to implement all of the things we are doing here, and we already agreed on, and trying, to make the world a better place.
And for the whales.
Of course. And for the oceans.
And for the oceans. And for the oceans. Well, thank you guys. This has been very insightful for me and hopefully for the audience as well. We all hope that what the conversations going in indoors right now do come out to be fruitful and positive as for all of our expectations, and we all get to go home with a little bit more optimism and a little bit more agency. To your point, that I had a little bit more agency on the role that we get to play. Thank you very much, everyone. Help me in thanking our